Good evening. Tonight we return to the place before morning and measure, only the open breath of chaos from which rose Earth Gaia, the depths of Tartarus, and the quiet necessary force of Eros. This is not a tale of war for war's sake. It is a meditation on beginning and separation, on patience and necessity, on how order rises out of silence. We'll trace the path from Gaia's rising and Uranus's vault to the birth of their children. The Titans, the Cyclopes, and the 100-handers hear the skies first scream when the adamantine sickle split the old order, watch Aphrodite lift from the sea foam, then Kronos' reign and the fear that teaches a father to swallow his own children, Rhea's cunning and Zeus hidden in a cave, the freeing of brothers and sisters, the Cyclope's gifts, the thunderbolt, the trident, and the helm of invisibility. 10 years of thunder and stone in the Titanomachy, when the 100-handers pelt the world with mountains, and finally the last squall, Typhon cast beneath the peak, and the division of realms by lot, sky, sea, the unseen, while the earth remains held in common. If tranquil journeys into myth like this speak to you, a quick like or subscribe helps a lot. More important is your feedback. Tell me in the comments what to improve, what would make these stories gentler or deeper. Your responses shape what comes next. And now, get comfortable, lying down or seated. Let your breath slow. This tale is patient and careful. It carries you gently toward rest, honouring the gravity of ancient choices. Let's enter it together, to where the abyss yawns, the sky draws back from the earth. 100 hands beat time upon stone, and at the hearth a quiet fire already burns. Before there was morning, before there was measure, there was the opening. Not a thing but an interval, a yielding, a gap that knew no edge because there was nothing yet to border it. The Greeks would call it chaos, though that name came later, when names themselves had learned to settle. In the hush before the hush could be named, chaos yawned. It was not violent. There was no rending, for there was nothing to rend. It simply was. The first condition, the space in which possibility might breathe. And from that openness, or perhaps alongside it, for sequence had not yet taken root, came the first shapes that would bear the weight of being. Gaia rose. Earth, broad-breasted, patient, solid where chaos was yielding. She did not step forth. She was forth, the ground of all that would come. Her body stretched wide and deep, a foundation that asked for no pedestal, a surface that held itself without question. Mountains had not yet broken her skin. Rivers had not yet written their passage across her. She lay still, the first stillness, and in her stillness was the promise of every field, every stone, every root that would one day press toward light. Beneath her, though beneath is a poor word for what had no above, Tartarus opened. If Gaia was the ground, Tartarus was the abyss. A place, yes, but more. A depth that swallowed even the idea of depth. A prison before there were prisoners, a darkness so complete it needed no shadow. Mist gathered there, or something like mist, thick and unmoving. The air, if it could be called air, tasted of bronze and forgetting. Tartarus did not speak. It waited. And with them, or between them, or woven through the space they made, Eros. Not the laughing child of the later songs, not the mischief maker with his quiver and his games, but something older, quieter, more necessary. Eros was the stirring, the unseen urge that drew the separate toward union, the force that whispered become when all might have remained forever apart. Without hands, without eyes, Eros moved through the new cosmos like a breath through reeds, coaxing, allowing, making room for the generative act. The poets would dress him in gold and call him fairest, but here, at the beginning, he was only the gentle insistence that wholeness might divide and dividing create. For a span, if span means anything when time has not yet been divided into days, Gaia rested. The world was still. No wind crossed her surface because there was no sky to hold the wind. No wave lapped at any shore because the sea had not yet gathered itself into a name. She was alone, the first solitary thing, and in her solitude she felt the weight of potential. She was fertile ground, but ground without seed. The silence pressed. Then, without warning and without drama, she brought forth. First came the mountains. They did not explode from her. They simply were, rising slow and certain, their backs long and patient, their peaks wearing the sky that was not yet sky. Ridges folded into valleys. Stone learned to be stone. The mountains stood, and they were hers, children of her substance rooted in her depths. They did not speak, but their presence was a kind of speech, permanence, endurance, the promise that some things would remain. Next, the sea. Pontus, the Greeks would call him, though whether he was son or consort or both, the old songs disagree. The waters gathered in the low places, pooling, reaching, learning the shape of basins Gaia's body made. The sea was restless where the mountains were still. It breathed in tides that had no moon to pull them. It whispered against shores that had no name. Pontus stretched, and the world learned the sound of lapping, the rhythm of ebb and return. He was hers, of her, and yet apart. A frontier, a boundary that moved. But the sky she made as a lover makes a mirror, as loneliness makes an answer. Uranus rose. Sky. Broad as Gaia herself, a canopy equal to her expanse, a cover to her foundation. Where she was solid, he was vault. Where she held, he stretched. Star-studded, the poets would call him later, though stars had not yet learned to kindle. For now he was only the great arch, the breathing space above, and he settled over Gaia as night settles over fields, as stillness settles over water. And from their union, for Eros had done his work silent and sure, came the first generation of the gods. They were 12, and the old songs name them carefully, as one names the pillars of a hall, as one counts the foundations of the world. First, the Titans. Oceanus came forth, the eldest, a river that wrapped the world's edge, water beyond water, the boundary where the known gave way to the endless. Beside him, Tethys, whose currents ran deep and quiet, whose eddies cradled 1,000 unborn springs. Then Hyperion, whose name meant the walker above, bearer of the light that would later be called sun. With him came Theia, bright and distant, her gaze a precursor to the gleam of gods who had not yet opened their eyes. Coeus arrived in silence, his realm the axis of thought, the turning pole of heaven's inquiry. Phoebe followed, her glow a foreshadowing of the calm that would steady the night. Creus, whose dominion no song fully mapped. Some said he governed constellations yet to wheel, others that he watched the turning seasons from a place beyond season. The poets gave him few words. He did not ask for more. Iapetus, whose sons would carry the weight of mortal fate, came forth bearing no prophecy but wearing the shadow of one. His shoulders were broad. He would need them. Mnemosyne, memory, who held what had passed and what would pass, her mind a vessel that could not spill. Even then, at the beginning, she was gathering. The first breath, the first shape, the first silence broken. Themis, who was order before order had a throne, law before law was written, the quiet rightness that lets a world stand rather than collapse into its own confusion. She did not speak often. When she did, the others leaned close. Rhea, mother-to-be, whose hands were gentle and whose sorrow was not yet born, and Kronos, the crooked-minded, the cunning one, whose thoughts turned in coils and whose ambition had not yet learned its cost. 12 Titans, elders of the world, pillars of the first order, children of sky and earth. But Gaia's womb was deeper still, and Uranus's seed more strange. From the same union came the Cyclopes, 3 brothers whose names rang like the hammer on bronze. Brontes, thunder; Sterops, lightning; Arges, brightness. Each bore a single eye, round and gleaming, set in the centre of his brow like a wheel, like a moon that never waned. They were smiths before there were forges, craftsmen before there was craft, and in their hands even the unformed air seemed to take shape. Strength ran through them like ore through stone, but it was not brute strength. It was the strength of making, of shaping, of bending the world's raw matter to purpose. They did not speak often. When they did, their voices rolled low, the sound of distant storms gathering, and last, the 100-handers, Hecatonchires the songs called them, the name a mouthful of awe and unease, Briareus, Cottus, Gyges, 3 brothers whose shoulders sprouted not 2 arms but 50 each, and from each great trunk rose not 1 head but 50 more. They were force multiplied, power made legion, the living proof that nature's first experiments do not always seek proportion. Where they walked, the ground shook. Where they reached, 100 hands grasped. They were terrible, and they were necessary, though it would be long before anyone understood why. Uranus looked upon his children, Titans crowned with possibility, Cyclopes gleaming with latent fire, 100-handers bristling with unruly strength, and he did not rejoice. He saw threat. He saw the future turning against him, saw in their eyes the gleam of ambition or the shadow of replacement. Perhaps he saw truly. Perhaps fear makes its own truth. The songs do not judge him here. They only tell what was. And what was this. Uranus refused his children the light of day. One by one, as each was born from Gaia's depths, the sky pressed close and thrust them back. Not into her arms, into her body, deep into the caverns beneath the surface, into the hot dark where stone melted and the weight of the world bore down from above. He sealed the Cyclopes and the 100-handers outright, as one hides a weapon too dangerous to hold. The Titans he pressed beneath his will, and kept to the world's dim margins, contained and constrained, never far from the threat of burial. Gaia felt each imprisonment as a wound. The children groaned in her depths. Their voices were muffled by stone and distance, but she heard them. How could she not? They were her flesh, her substance, and their suffering was a pressure against her caverns, a grinding ache that never ceased. The 100-handers beat their fists against the underworld's roof. The Cyclops' single eyes wept, though no one saw the tears, and Gaia, broad and patient, who had borne them all, who had given them shape and breath, bore this new thing, grief. She did not weep. The poets do not give her tears, not yet. But deep within her, where magma churned and the bones of the world softened, something harder than sorrow took root. It was not revenge. Revenge is too small a word, too mortal. It was necessity. It was the knowledge that what has been bound must someday loose, that pressure unrelieved will find its crack, that even the sky cannot press forever without answer. And so she waited. The world meanwhile learned its first rhythms. Pontus rolled against shores that were still learning their shape. The mountains stood. Uranus stretched above, his weight a lid on the pot of becoming. his presence a sky that gave no rain because rain requires release, requires the yielding he would not give. Day and night had not yet divided themselves cleanly. There was only the dim, even glow of a world half born, the twilight of an age that could not decide whether to begin or to end. The Titans moved through this strange dusk. Oceanus circled the world's rim, his waters a boundary and a promise. Hyperion climbed the vault's curve, testing the limits of above. Themis stood at the centre of things, her gaze level, her silence a kind of order. Mnemosyne watched and remembered. The first binding, the first concealment, the first time the father's will stood against the children's breath. Kronos, youngest and keenest, moved among his siblings with a quietness that was not quite stillness. His mind turned. His eyes, when he looked upward, did not blink. Rhea walked beside him sometimes, her hand in his, though the songs do not say if she guessed what thoughts coiled behind his brow. She was gentle then. The grief that would hollow her had not yet arrived. She moved through the world as one moves through a garden at evening, marvelling at the newness of leaf and stone, unaware that the garden's gate might close. Eros, who had no shape but was everywhere, drifted through it all. The primordial urge, the generative whisper, threaded itself through the Titans' lives, coaxing bonds, allowing unions, setting the stage for the countless generations that would follow. The world was still largely empty. No mortals, no cities, no fields sown and reaped. But the gods were learning to speak, to touch, to look at one another and see not merely sibling but something more complex. Ally, rival, beloved, threat. And beneath it all, Tartarus waited. The abyss had spoken no word since its first opening, had claimed no voice, but its presence was a constant. It lay below Gaia as Gaia lay below Uranus, and in its depths the air was thick, the darkness total. The 100-handers paced there, their 100 hands clenching and unclenching, their 50 heads murmuring to one another in a language no one else would ever speak. The Cyclops sat in silence, their single eyes glowing faintly in the dark, seeing the walls that had no seam, the prison that had no door. They did not despair. Despair requires hope's memory. But they endured. And endurance, when it goes on long enough, becomes a kind of strength. Gaia felt them. Every hour, every turning of the dim, not quite day, she felt them. And in her depths, where the first mountains rooted, where the first seas gathered their weight, she began to plan. The sickle had not yet been forged. The blow had not yet fallen. The blood had not yet spilled. The foam had not yet gathered. The new age had not yet drawn its breath. But the conditions were assembling. Pressure and patience, grief and resolve, the inexorable truth that no order founded on fear and burial can stand forever. The world was young, but already it was learning the lessons that would echo through every age to come. That power invites challenge, that concealment breeds cunning, that the Father's hand, if it grips too tight, will teach the sun to imagine freedom. Uranus stretched above, star-studded and unyielding, believing himself eternal. Gaia lay below, broad-breasted and patient, and she did not contradict him. Not yet. But in the space between sky and earth, in the dim twilight where the Titans walked and the buried gods groaned, Eros stirred. The old urge, the necessary force, moved through the cosmos like a current through deep water, and the world, still unmeasured, still unnamed in so many of its parts, leaned forward into whatever would come next. The chasm had yawned. The earth had risen, the sky had closed. Now the cosmos held its breath, and in the stillness before the storm even the mountains seemed to listen, Somewhere, in a cave so deep no light had ever touched it, stone softened under unimaginable heat. Somewhere, in the mind of the youngest Titan, a thought took shape, hard and bright as diamond, sharp as the tool that did not yet exist. Somewhere, on the shore of a sea that had no name, a wave broke and drew back, and the foam it left behind glittered for a moment before sinking into the sand. The world had begun, but it had not yet become. That transformation waited, coiled in the dark, patient as Gaia, inevitable as the turning of the sky. And when it came, when the sickle flashed and the blood fell and the scream of the wounded father echoed across the newly separated realms, the world would learn that creation is not a single act but a spiral, that every beginning carries within it the seed of its own unmaking, and that the cosmos, for all its grandeur, is never more than a breath away from chaos. But that is the next part of the tale, for now, in the hush before measure, in the twilight of the first age, the world simply was, earth and sky, mountain and sea, the buried and the bright, all held in the tension of a story that had just begun to tell itself. And if you listened carefully, if you pressed your ear to the ground, or turned your face to the vault above, or waded into the tideless sea, you might have heard it, the low hum of becoming, the quiet insistence of Eros, the distant rhythm of 100 hands beating against stone, the whisper of a mother who had borne the world and would not let it remain forever unborn. The chasm had yawned, and the cosmos, balanced on the edge between stillness and motion, waited to see what would rise from the depths, what would fall from the heights, and what new shape the world would take when the old order finally gave way. The story was just beginning. And beginnings, as the world was learning, are never as simple as they seem. Gaia spoke to her children in the language that predates speech, the rumble of stone shifting, the slow exhale of volcanic vents, the whisper of roots pressing through darkness. She did not gather them in a hall, for there were no halls. She did not send messengers, for there was no need. The Titans felt her summons in their bones, in the marrow that was her substance, and one by one they came. They assembled at a place that was not yet a place, a hollow in the world's flank where the mountains leaned close, and the sky seemed, for a moment, less oppressive. The light was dim, the colour of tarnished bronze, and the air lay heavy and still. Oceanus arrived first, his waters pooling at the edges of the gathering, lapping softly at stone. Hyperion came with Thea, their brightness muted in the perpetual twilight. Coeus and Phoebe stood together, silent and watchful. Creus kept to the shadows. Iapetus, broad-shouldered, positioned himself where he could see all approaches. Themis took her place at the centre, her face unreadable. Mnemosyne stood slightly apart, her eyes already recording what had not yet occurred. Rhea came with Kronos, their hands unclasped now, each moving through the crowd alone though they arrived together. She glanced at him once, a question in her eyes, but he did not meet her gaze. His attention was elsewhere, inward, downward, toward the voice that had called them. When all 12 had assembled, Gaia rose among them. Not in body, her body was the ground they stood on, the foundation beneath, but in presence, a concentration of awareness that made the air thicken and the stone beneath their feet hum with contained force. She did not take human shape. The poets would later give her arms, a face, features to make her comprehensible to mortal imagination, but here, at the world's beginning, she was only herself, vast, patient, and now, finally, moved to speech. Children, she said, and the word was not sound but pressure, a wave that passed through earth and air and the bodies of the listening gods. You have walked the world's surface while your brothers lie buried in my depths. You have breathed the air while they choke on stone. You have known the sky's expanse while they know only the weight of my flesh pressing down, and his will holding them there. The Titans stirred. A few glanced upward, where Uranus stretched, star-studded and silent, the great vault that covered all. He gave no sign of hearing, but then he gave no sign of anything. He simply was, as he had always been, present, encompassing, unyielding. He fears what he has made, Gaia continued, and now there was heat in her voice, the heat of magma, of stone remembering its molten origins. He fears the strength in their arms, the fire in their eyes, the future they represent. And so he has thrust them back into the dark from which they came, and he presses his weight upon the world so that they cannot rise. He uses me as their prison. He makes my love into their cage. Themis leaned forward slightly. What would you have us do? It was the question they all held, though only she had the courage or the clarity to speak it aloud. Gaia's presence swelled, filling the hollow, and for a moment the ground beneath them trembled. Free them, she said. End his tyranny. Take from him the power to bind, the power to bury, the power to crush beneath his will everything that rises. She paused, and the silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. I have forged the means. I need only the hand to wield it. From the stone at the centre of the gathering something emerged. It rose as a plant rises, but it was not a plant. It was grey and gleaming, harder than anything the world had yet produced, shaped with a curve that suggested both reaping and rending, a sickle. Adamant some songs call the metal, though whether that is a name or a description. Unbreakable, untamable, the old words do not clarify. It lay on the ground, its edge catching the dim light, and the Titans looked at it and understood. This was not a tool for harvest. This was a weapon. No one moved. The silence deepened, became something more than absence of sound, became refusal, became fear, became the terrible weight of understanding what was being asked. To raise hand against the Father, to strike at the sky itself, to sever the order that had stood since the first separation from chaos. The mind recoiled. Even the bravest among them felt it, the visceral wrongness of the act, the sense that some threshold, once crossed, could never be recrossed. Oceanus shook his head slowly, his waters withdrawing slightly from the gathering's edge. Hyperion looked away. Iapetus's jaw tightened, but he did not step forward. Crius melted further into shadow. Even Themis, who knew the shape of necessary law, who could see the justice in the claim, even she held back. The rightness of the cause did not make the act less terrible. One by one, the Titans refused. Not with words, few of them spoke, but with stillness, with the turning away of eyes, with a small backward step that said not I, not this, not yet. Only Kronos remained facing the sickle. He stood motionless for a long span, his gaze fixed on the gleaming blade. The others watched him, some with hope, some with something closer to dread. He was the youngest, the last born, and there was in him a quality the others lacked. Not courage exactly, but a willingness to bend where they would break, to turn where they would stand firm, to see around corners they could not imagine. The poets would call him crooked-minded, and they would not mean it kindly, but here, in this moment, his crooked mind was what the world required. "Mother," he said, and his voice was soft, almost gentle, the voice of a son speaking to the one who bore him. "If I do this thing, what comes after?" "Freedom," Gaia said, "for your brothers, for the world, for for the future that cannot unfold while he holds it pinned beneath his weight. And for me? The question hung in the air, naked and unashamed. The other titans shifted uncomfortably. It was too direct, too revealing of ambition's root. But Gaia did not flinch from it. Sovereignty, she said simply. The sky's rule will pass. Another must take his place, must hold the order, must govern what he would have kept forever static. That one will be you. Kronos nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already known, some conclusion his coiling thoughts had reached long before this gathering. He stepped forward, knelt, and lifted the sickle. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, but his hand did not tremble. The blade caught the light, and the light seemed to sharpen along its edge, as if the metal itself were eager for the work. "Tell me when," he said. "Tell me where." And Gaia, who had carried the world and its griefs, who had felt her children's suffering as her own, who had waited with the patience of stone for this moment, told him. Uranus came to Gaia as he had always come, descending from the vault, stretching himself over her expanse, covering her with his presence. It was not tenderness, though the act mimicked tender things. It was possession, the assertion of his place, the weight of the sky reminding the earth of its station. He spoke no words. He never did. He simply pressed close, and in that pressing the world grew smaller, the twilight dimmed, and everything beneath him bent under the force of his will. But this time, hidden in a fold of the world's surface, in a crevice Gaia had opened for precisely this purpose, Kronos waited. His brothers and sisters had withdrawn. None of them wanted to witness what was coming, what their refusal had allowed, what their youngest would do in their stead. Only Gaia was present, and she was always present, for she was the ground itself. She felt Uranus settle, felt the old familiar weight, and she opened herself to receive him one final time. And as he pressed close, as his attention turned wholly to the act of union, as his guard, if he'd ever had a guard, dissolved in the ancient rhythm, Kronos emerged from hiding. He moved swiftly. There was no hesitation now, no last moment of doubt. The sickle flashed, its adamant edge tracing an arc through the dim air, and where it struck it severed. The wound was precise. The poets shy from describing it directly, but they are clear on what was taken. The organs of generation, the seat of potency, the physical source of Uranus's creative force. Kronos swung, and the blade, unbreakable, untamable, cut through divine flesh as easily as a farmer's scythe through summer wheat. Uranus screamed. It was the first scream the cosmos had heard, and it was terrible. It was not pain alone, though pain was in it. It was violation, shock, the sudden apprehension that the order he believed eternal was in fact as vulnerable as everything else. The sky convulsed. Stars that had hung steady flickered. The vault itself seemed to shudder, as if contemplating collapse. But it did not collapse. Uranus pulled back, recoiling from Gaia's surface, rising into the heights he had always claimed, and as he rose, he bled. The blood fell in droplets, dark against the twilight, and where each drop struck the earth, something stirred. Gaia received the blood as she received everything, into her substance, into her depths, and from that mingling of sky's essence and earth's body, new life kindled. The Erinyes were born from those drops, 3 sisters though they shared no womb save the wounded ground itself. Alecto, Tisiphone, Megaera. They rose with eyes that burned, with hair that writhed, with voices that would learn to howl the names of the guilty and drive them to the edge of madness. They were vengeance given form, retribution made animate, the world's answer to the crime of kin blood shed. They did not speak as they rose. They simply stood, watching Kronos with expressions that held neither gratitude nor condemnation, only the cold knowledge of what he had done and what it would mean. Beside them, from other drops, came the giants, vast beings, thick-limbed and fierce, whose arrival would wait for a later age to matter. And the Meliae, ash-tree nymphs, slender and pale, who would one day populate the groves but now merely clustered together, newly formed and silent, their eyes wide. Kronos barely noticed them. His attention was on the thing he held, the severed flesh, still bleeding, heavy in his palm. For a moment he stood frozen, as if uncertain what to do with it, as if the act had exhausted his plan and left him holding evidence he had not anticipated. Then, with a gesture that seemed almost careless, he flung it away. The flesh arced through the air, tumbling end over end, and fell toward the sea. Pontus received it without comment. The waters swallowed the divine remnant, and for a span nothing happened. The sea rolled on, tideless and dark as it always had. But beneath the surface, where light did not reach, where the boundary between water and the deeper nothing grew thin, something stirred. Foam began to gather, white, thick, persistent. It swirled around the sunken flesh, drawing substance from it, taking shape from the mingled essences of sea and sky, and the strange alchemy of violence. The foam grew, became a mass, a column, a presence, and from that presence slowly a figure emerged. She would be called Aphrodite, though that name too came later. She would be called foam-born, laughter-loving, golden, the one who loosens limbs and tames the wise. But here, at her rising, she was nameless, new, and terrible in her beauty. She stepped from the waves with no memory of making, no childhood, no slow growth from infant to maturity. She was complete, immediate, and in her eyes was something that made even the sea hesitate. A power older than thought, deeper than desire, the raw force of attraction that could topple kingdoms and shatter resolve. She walked toward the shore, and where her foot touched the sand, flowers bloomed. The first flowers, sudden and improbable, their colours bright against the world's pervading gloom. Grass sprang up. The air sweetened, and though she spoke no word, her presence spoke for her, announcing a new force in the cosmos, one that would rival even the Titans in its reach. But she was not yet part of the tale's main thread. She walked inland, and the world adjusted to her presence, and the poet set her aside for now, saving her story for the songs that would follow. On the height where Uranus had withdrawn, the wounded sky raged. His voice, when it came, was not scream now, but pronouncement, deep and implacable as the vault itself. "Titans," he said, and the word carried across the whole world, reaching every corner where his children stood. "You who sprang from my union with earth, hear me. You who raised no hand to stop this crime, who let your youngest play the traitor, who looked away while he struck, hear your father's word." The Titans heard, and they trembled. Even Kronos, standing with the sickle still in his hand, felt the weight of that voice pressing down. "You are named," Uranus continued, and there was bitter satisfaction in his tone, the satisfaction of one who, even in defeat, finds a way to wound. "I name you Titans, strainers, oversteppers, for you have strained against the order and overstepped the bounds set for children. You've reached beyond your station, and for this you will suffer. Not today, not tomorrow, but the pattern you have woven will turn against you, and your own children will rise as you have risen, and the violence you permitted will find its way back to your door." He paused, and the silence was absolute. "Time," he said, his voice fading now, withdrawing into the heights. "Time will be your punishment. You who sought to escape my rule will learn that every rule invites rebellion, that every father breeds his own usurper, that the cosmos turns, and what rises must eventually fall." The words echoed, diminished, vanished into the expanse. Uranus did not descend again. He remained in the heights, present but separate, the sky that would no longer press upon the earth, the father who had withdrawn from his creation. He would give rain, eventually, and wind, and the slow turning of the stars. But he would not rule. That age was finished, and in the space his withdrawal left, the world exhaled. The separation was immediate and total. Where before the sky had lain against the earth like a lid on a vessel, now there was distance, openness, room for things to grow and move and breathe. The air changed. It became lighter, clearer, no longer oppressed by Uranus's constant weight. The twilight persisted. The sun and moon had not yet taken their stations, but it was a softer gloom now, one that held possibility rather than suffocation. Kronos stood at the centre of the transformed world, the sickle still in his hand, and felt the weight of sovereignty settle on his shoulders. It was heavier than he had anticipated. His siblings approached slowly, one by one, their expressions unreadable. They did not accuse him. He had done what they would not, but neither did they celebrate. They simply acknowledged. The youngest was now the eldest in authority. The crooked-minded had become the ruler. "Free them," Themis said quietly, and it was not a suggestion. Kronos's gaze did not waver. He turned inward, measuring risk against reward. Then he turned away. "The order holds," he said at last. "The deep will keep what it keeps." He did not descend to open any gates. The Cyclopes and the 100-handers remained in darkness, bound anew to Tartarus by the will of a new king who feared them as his father had. The world above, for a time, was quiet. The Titans gathered again, this time not in a hidden hollow but under the separated sky. They looked at Kronos, and he spoke words that would echo with a promise he would not keep. "The sky has withdrawn. The earth has opened. We are free to shape what comes next." He paused, weighing the blade in his hand, feeling its heft, its potential, its danger. "Let us not forget the price of this freedom. Let us rule wisely, and well, and without the fear that bound our father." They nodded, believing him, or wanting to believe him, or simply accepting the reality that he now held power and they did not. The sickle gleamed in the dim light, a reminder, a warning, a promise not yet tested. And beneath them all, Gaia rested. The weight that had pressed upon her was lifted, but Uranus's final words lingered in her depths like a seed, like a prophecy, like a curse that had not yet learned its full shape. Time will be your punishment. The cosmos turned. The first age ended. The second began. And the story, as always, continued. Kronos took Rhea as his consort, as the songs had always suggested he would. She was the mountain mother, the one whose hands knew the art of nurturing, whose presence steadied the wild edges of the newly ordered world. Their union was proper, expected, the seal upon his sovereignty. The Titans approved, or at least did not object. Oceanus sent his blessing in the form of a gift, waters that would never run dry. Themis witnessed the joining with her quiet gaze, reading in it the threads that would weave forward into time. Mnemosyne recorded every word spoken, every gesture made, storing them in the vast repository of her mind where nothing was ever truly lost. For a span, long by mortal measure, brief by the count of gods, the world rested in the calm Kronos had promised. The sky remained distant, the earth open. The Cyclops worked in silence where they were shut away, their craft stifled by iron boundaries. The 100-handers dwelt in the margins of the deep, endurance hardening into watchful strength. Aphrodite walked the shores and the green valleys, and wherever she passed the harshness softened. Animals lost their edge of fear, plants bloomed out of season, and even the stones seemed to warm in her wake. But Uranus's words had not dissolved into the air. They clung to Kronos like morning mist, like the taste of bronze on the tongue. The sun who rose by guile shall be overthrown by a sun in his turn. He heard them when he woke, when he stood on the summit of Mount Othrys surveying his realm, when he lay beside Rhea in the dark. He heard them, and they ate at him, quiet and relentless as rust. He sought counsel, first from Themis, who listened with her even attention and said only, "What is spoken into the cosmos does not unsay itself. You may accept it or refuse it, but you cannot unhear it." Then from Gaia, who received him in a valley where the stones still bore the scars of old upheaval. "Mother," he said, "tell me how to escape what the sky pronounced." Gaia looked at him with eyes that had seen the birth of the world and the wounding that had separated her from the one who had covered her. "You escaped nothing," she said. "You fulfilled what was already written in the pattern of generation. If you fear your children, you become your father. If you trust them, you may break the cycle, or you may prove the prophecy true. There is no safe path, my son, only the path you choose." He did not like that answer. He withdrew, brooding, and the counsel he sought next came from within, from the crooked turnings of his own mind, from the cunning that had let him wield the sickle when his brothers would not. And in those turnings he found a solution that seemed to him both elegant and necessary. "If I do not let them grow, they cannot overthrow me." Rhea bore her first child in the quiet of a spring morning when the world was green and the air gentle. The infant was a daughter, small and perfect, her eyes bright as hearth fire. Rhea held her, felt the weight of new life in her arms, and smiled. She had no name ready. Names, she thought, could wait until the child had shown her nature. But already she felt the bond, the fierce love that mothers know. Kronos came to see his daughter. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he held out his hands. "Let me hold her," he said. Rhea, trusting, passed the infant to him. He cradled her carefully, this small thing, this helpless scrap of divine life. And then, before Rhea could draw breath to speak, he opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. The silence that followed was absolute. Rhea stood frozen, her arm still shaped to the weight that was no longer there, her mind unable to grasp what her eyes had just witnessed. When understanding came, it came as a scream, raw, wordless, the sound of a mother whose child has been taken in the cruelest way imaginable. Kronos did not flinch. "She is not dead," he said, his voice steady. "She is safe, safer than she would be in the world, where prophecy waits to turn her against me. Inside she will never grow, never threaten, never fulfill the curse. It is mercy, Rhea. It is the only way." Rhea looked at him with eyes that no longer recognized the god she had wed. But what could she do? He was sovereign. He held power. She was alone in her grief, and grief, for all its force, has no hands to strike with, no voice that can compel a king. She bore a second child, Demeter, the poets would call her later, though Rhea did not name her aloud, did not want to make her real in speech, knowing what was coming. This daughter had hair the colour of summer wheat, and hands that reached instinctively toward earth and growing things. Rhea held her as long as she dared, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the warmth of her breath, the tiny fingers that curled around her own. Kronos came. Rhea tried to turn away to shield the child, but he was stronger. He took the infant gently, as if tenderness could excuse what followed, and swallowed her. Rhea didn't scream this time. She had no scream left. She only wept, silent and shaking, while Kronos stood before her and repeated the same words. She is safe. It is mercy. It is necessary. A third child came, a daughter whose bearing was regal even in infancy, whose gaze held a dignity that seemed too old for her newborn face. Hera, who would one day wear the crown of heaven and bear the weight of queenship with a spine that never bent. Rhea held her and whispered promises she knew she could not keep. When Kronos arrived, she did not resist. She had learned that resistance changed nothing. She simply closed her eyes as he took the child and consigned her to the dark. The pattern held. A fourth child, a son this time, solemn and quiet, with eyes that seemed to see past the surface of things into the hidden depths beneath. Hades, the unseen one, who would one day rule the realm below and wear shadows like a cloak. Kronos swallowed him, as he had swallowed the others, and Rhea felt another piece of her heart hollow out and vanish. A fifth child, another son, broad-shouldered even as an infant, with a voice that when he cried sounded like distant surf. Poseidon, who would shake the earth and command the waves. Kronos' throat opened. The child disappeared. Rhea stopped counting the losses. It hurt less if she did not name them, did not let herself imagine who they might have become. 5 children swallowed. 5 futures erased, held in suspension within the body of the father who feared them. The world watched and said nothing. The Titans did not intervene. This was Kronos' household, his sovereignty, his choice. Themis frowned but held her peace. Even order, it seemed, could bend to accommodate monstrosity if the one committing it held sufficient power. Mnemosyne recorded it all, her face a mask, storing the horror for whatever age might come that would need to remember. But Rhea's grief was not infinite. Grief, pressed hard enough, transforms. It becomes rage or despair, or, in certain rare souls, cunning. She went to Gaia. The meeting took place in the same valley where Kronos had once sought counsel, though the stone seemed older now, more worn, as if time itself had aged in the span since the sky's wounding. Rhea knelt before the presence that was her mother, her grandmother, the foundation of all that stood, and she spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. Mother Earth, I have borne 5 children and held none. I am to bear a 6th, and I will not give him to the dark. Tell me how to save him. Tell me how to deceive the one who devoured my heart 5 times over. I will do anything. I will pay any price. Only let one child live. Gaia's presence swelled, filling the valley, and when she spoke her voice was layered. Sorrow and resolve, memory and prediction, all woven together into a single thread of sound. I will help you, daughter, but the deception must be complete, and the hiding deep, and the patience long. Are you prepared for all of that? I am. Gaia showed her the ruse. Swaddle a stone as if it were your son, she said, and hide the child in a cave where the world forgets its own name. Your father, distant though he is now, will not betray you. He knows the pattern that has been set. Between us, the plot will hold. Rhea listened. She gathered a river-smooth stone, heavy and dense, and wrapped it in the same cloth she had prepared for each child. The fibres scented with thyme and sweet herbs. When it was done, it looked like an infant. Enough for haste, enough for a god who would not look closely because certainty is its own blindfold. The birth came on a night when the stars were bright and the wind carried the scent of cypress. Rhea laboured alone. She trusted no attendants, wanted no witnesses, and when the child emerged, when she held him and heard his first cry, she allowed herself one moment of unguarded joy. He was perfect, strong. His eyes, when they opened, were bright and searching, already curious about the world he'd entered. She did not name him aloud, but in her heart she called him Zeus, the bright one, the sky sun who would reclaim what his father had stolen. She held him as long as she dared. Then, with hands that shook only slightly, she placed him in a sling against her chest and took up the swaddled stone. The switch was simple, mechanical, the kind of motion that leaves no room for doubt or a second thought. The stone went into the cradle. The child stayed hidden, warm against her heartbeat. When Kronos came, she was ready. She lifted the stone, cradling it as she had cradled the real children, and she met his eyes with the look that mixed resignation and exhaustion, exactly what he expected to see. "Another son," she said, her voice flat. "The 6th." He reached for the bundle and she let him take it. She watched his hands close around the stone, watched him lift it toward his mouth, and she did not look away. This was the price of cunning, to witness the deception, to hold steady while the lie took root, to give no sign that anything was different. Kronos swallowed the stone. It went down hard. Stone is not flesh, and even wrapped it had a weight and texture that must have felt wrong. But he did not pause, did not question. He believed himself invincible. He believed Rhea defeated. And belief, when it is strong enough, blinds even gods. He turned and left without another word, and Rhea, alone in the room, exhaled the breath she'd been holding. The child against her chest stirred, a tiny movement, and she placed her hand over him, shielding, protecting, promising in silence what she could not yet promise aloud. That night, guided by Gaia's quiet instructions carried on the wind and whispered through the roots, Rhea fled. She travelled south and east, across mountains and through valleys where few gods wandered, toward the island the songs call Crete. The journey was long, but she did not rest more than she had to. Every moment delay was a moment Kronos might discover the ruse, might sense the life that still pulsed free in the world. She found the cave as dawn touched the sky, a deep cleft in the mountainside hidden by trees and tangled vines, its mouth narrow and unassuming. Inside, the air was cool and still, and the stone walls bore markings older than the Titans, older perhaps than Gaia's first shaping. This was a womb of earth, a place where the world remembered its own infancy. Rhea laid the child in a hollow lined with soft moss and fleece, and she wept. Not from sorrow now, but from relief so profound it felt like breaking. "Live," she whispered. "Grow. Become what you must. And when the time comes, remember." She could not stay. Her absence from Othris would be noticed, questioned. She kissed the child once, her lips against his brow, and then she turned and walked back into the world she'd briefly escaped, leaving her son in the care of those Gaia had appointed. The nymphs came first, Adrastea and Ida, daughters of Melisius, the ash tree king. They were young and gentle, with voices like wind through leaves, and they took the infant into their arms and promised to guard him. They fed him on the milk of the goat Amalthea, whose udders never ran dry, whose milk was sweeter than honey and stronger than wine. The child thrived on it, growing faster than mortal children, his limbs lengthening, his eyes sharpening, his mind waking to the world's complexity. The curettes came too, young men, some said, or spirits of the wild places, fierce and loyal and loud. They danced outside the cave, beating their spears against their shields, filling the air with such clamour that no cry from within could escape to betray the hiding place. When the infant Zeus wept, the shields rang. When he laughed, the shields rang louder. They made a wall of sound around him, a fortress of noise that kept him safe and secret. Seasons turned. The child learned to crawl, to walk, to run through the cave's dim passages. He learned speech from the nymphs, learned the names of things and the ways they connected. He learned strength from his own growing body, learned patience from the long quiet hours when the only sound was the drip of water on stone. And he learned, though no one taught him directly, that he was hidden for a reason, that somewhere beyond the cave a father waited who must not find him, and that his life depended on silence and cunning and the loyalty of those who had given their care freely. When he was near grown, he went first to Metis, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, keen-minded, foresighted, who received him with the calm of one who's been expecting a knock long before it sounds. From a chest woven of kelp and silver she drew a small vial. "A potion," she said. "It will compel him to disgorge what he has swallowed. Stone first, then your siblings in reverse order. Be ready. They will emerge full-grown and disoriented. You will need to be the steady one, the voice that tells them who they are and what comes next." Zeus held the vial to the light. The liquid inside was pale, luminous, shifting as if alive. "How do I give it to him?" "Disguise yourself. Approach him as a cupbearer, a servant. He will not look closely. He believes himself untouchable." "And after?" "After," Metis said, "you free the others, the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers. They have been imprisoned again. Without them, you cannot win what is coming." Zeus nodded slowly, the pieces arranging themselves in his mind, the path forward becoming clear. "Thank you, Metis. I will remember this." "I know you will," she said softly. "Go now. The world is waiting." The approach to Othrys was careful, measured. Zeus wore the shape of a mortal servant, his divinity cloaked, his presence muted. The Titans who passed him barely glanced. Servants were beneath notice, invisible in their utility. He reached the hall where Kronos held court, and he offered his service. Wine, water, whatever the Lord required. Kronos accepted the cup without question. The wine was dark, rich, laced with the potion Metis had crafted. He drank deeply, and for a moment nothing happened. Then his face twisted. His hand went to his throat. He doubled over, and the hall fell silent, all eyes turning to their sovereign as his body convulsed. The stone came first, hurtling from his mouth and striking the floor with a sound like a hammer on anvil. Then Poseidon, gasping, full-grown and furious. Then Hades, pale and composed even in shock. Then Hera, regal and disoriented, her eyes scanning the hall for threats. Then Demeter, her hands already reaching for the earth she'd not touched in so long. And finally Hestia, quiet and steady, the eldest, the first swallowed and the last freed. They stood in a line, these five who'd been held in suspension, and they looked at the young god who had freed them, their brother, though they had never met him. An understanding dawned in their eyes. Zeus let his disguise fall. He stood before them in his true form, and he spoke in a voice that carried authority he had not yet earned but would. "I am Zeus, the sixth child, the hidden one. Our father swallowed you to prevent a prophecy. I have freed you to fulfill it. If you will stand with me, we will take what is ours. If you will not, I will stand alone. But either way, the age of Kronos ends now." Poseidon was the first to step forward, his grin fierce. "I'm with you, brother." Hades nodded once, his expression unreadable but his stance firm. "As am I." The sisters joined them without hesitation, and in that moment the balance of the cosmos shifted. 6 gods stood together, united by blood and purpose, and the world leaned forward into the war that had been written in the stars since the first prophecy was spoken. But before the war, one task remained. Zeus descended to the deep, past the roots of mountains, past the sources of hidden rivers, down to the place where Tartarus brushed against the world. The gates were sealed, the bronze thick and unyielding, but he carried his mother's blessing and his grandmother's instruction, and the gates recognized him. They opened. The Cyclops looked up as light, thin and dim though it was, spilled into their prison for the first time in an age. Brontes, Sterops, Arges, thunder, lightning, brightness. Their single eyes gleamed, and when they saw who had come, they rose. "You freed us once before," Brontes said, his voice like distant drums. "Then we were bound again. Why should we trust this freedom?" "Because I offer you not just freedom but purpose," Zeus said. "Help me overthrow the one who imprisoned you. Fight at my side, and when the war is won, you will never be chained again. You have my word." The Cyclopes looked at one another, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then Sterops nodded. "We will forge for you weapons such as the world has not seen. In return, you will keep your word." "I will." From the deeper dark came the 100-handers, their countless arms uncoiling, their 50 heads turning to regard the god who had opened the gates. "And us?" Cottus asked. "What do you offer us?" "War," Zeus said simply. "The chance to use your strength for something other than endurance. The chance to stand in the light and be seen." Gyges laughed, a sound like an avalanche. "That is enough. Lead, and we will follow." The Cyclops worked in the depths, their hammers ringing, their forges flaring. They shaped 3 gifts, each one a masterwork, each one a symbol of the power that was being claimed and the order that was being born. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, a jagged shaft of light that crackled with contained storm, that could split mountains and shake the heavens, that marked him as the sky's true heir. For Poseidon, the trident, 3-pronged, blue gleaming, forged from sea bronze and storm silver, a tool to command waves and shatter stone, to claim dominion over the waters Oceanus had encircled. For Hades, the helm of invisibility, a dark cap that bent light and shadow, that let the wearer walk unseen, that granted mastery over the hidden places and the secrets the world kept. When the gifts were given, when each god held the token of his power, the cosmos drew a breath. The war was not yet begun, but its outcome was already written in the weight of those weapons, in the resolve of those who wielded them, in the inevitability of the cycle that Uranus had first pronounced, and that now at last was coming full circle. Zeus stood with his siblings, with the Cyclops, with the 100-handers, and he looked toward Othrys, where Kronos and the Titans held their ancient seat. The thunderbolt crackled in his hand. The world waited, and in the stillness before the storm, even the stones seemed to listen, knowing that what came next would reshape everything, that the cradle had given way to the chasm, and the chasm was about to give birth to something new. The war began not with the declaration, but with a tremor, a shudder that ran through the earth from peak to foundation. the kind of disturbance that makes birds fall silent and rivers hesitate in their course. The Titans felt it first, those who kept watch on Othrys's slopes, and they turned their faces toward Olympus, toward the bright mountain that had stood empty and unregarded until now, and saw what had not been there before. Figures ascending, light gathering, the glint of weapons that had never tasted battle. Kronos stood at Othrys's summit and understood immediately. The stone he had swallowed, the children he had believed safely imprisoned within himself, the hidden sixth who should not exist. All of it had been undone. The deception was complete, the consequences arrived, and the prophecy that had gnawed at him through all the long years of his reign was about to close its jaws. He did not rage. Rage is the response of those who believe they can still control the outcome. Instead, he turned to his brothers, Iapetus, Creus, Hyperion, Cuus, and spoke in the measured tone of one who's accepted the inevitable, but will not yield without testing its weight. "They come," he said. "Arm yourselves. Call all who will answer. This is the hour Uranus spoke of, and we will meet it as Titans." The elder gods gathered. Not all. Oceanus, lord of the encircling waters, withdrew to his distant realm and took no side, unwilling to raise hand against kin or to defend an order he had long regarded with ambivalence. Themis too held herself apart, for she was law and order itself, and she saw in the coming conflict not rebellion but transition, the necessary rebalancing that every age requires. Mnemosyne watched from the margins, recording, her face unreadable, her allegiance to memory alone. But the others came. Hyperion with his burning gaze, Iapetus broad-shouldered and grim, Creus pale and silent, Cuus turning over strategies in his mind, and with them the sons of Iapetus, Atlas, who bore on his shoulders the weight of inherited duty, Menoetius, fierce and unsubtle, Prometheus, whose eyes already saw further than the present moment, who understood that what was coming was not merely war but transformation, and who held his counsel close. Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose hindsight would always be clearer than his foresight, stood ready but uncertain, glancing often at Prometheus as if seeking guidance that was not given. They armed themselves with what the world provided, boulders torn from mountainsides, trees uprooted to serve as clubs, the raw matter of the earth itself turned to weaponry. They were strong, stronger than almost anything the cosmos had produced, and they had ruled for an age uncounted. But they had grown comfortable in that rule, accustomed to obedience, and comfort is a poor preparation for the kind of struggle that was about to begin. On Olympus the younger gods made ready. Zeus stood at the centre, the thunderbolt crackling in his grip, its light casting sharp shadows across the assembled faces. Poseidon hefted the trident, feeling its balance, the way it hummed with the potential of tides and earthquakes. Hades fastened the helm upon his brow and felt the world's sight slide away from him, felt the power of moving unseen and unnoticed through the chaos of battle. Hera adjusted the drape of her robe, her bearing calm, her eyes assessing. She would not fight in the front lines, but her presence steadied the others, gave them something to defend beyond mere survival. Demeter stood with her hands open, ready to call upon the earth's response to bless or blight as the moment required, and Hestia, eldest and quietest, took her place at the hearth they had kindled on Olympus's peak, tending the flame that would burn through all that followed, the still centre around which the storm would rage. The Cyclops had returned to their forges, crafting arms for the lesser gods and allies who had joined the cause. The 100-handers positioned themselves at the mountain's base, their countless arms flexing, their 50 heads murmuring to one another in the low language only they spoke, preparing for the work they'd been born to do. "Brothers, sisters," Zeus said, his voice carrying across the assembly, "we did not choose this war. It was written before we drew breath, set in motion the moment our father chose fear over trust, imprisonment over freedom. But we will finish it. We will take what was denied us, not out of vengeance, though we have cause, but because the world requires it. The age of swallowing and hiding is over. The age of light begins now." Poseidon grinned, fierce and eager. "Then let's begin." And so they descended, and the Titans climbed to meet them, and in the wide plain that lay between Othrys and Olympus, the war that would last 10 years began in earnest. The songs call it the Titanomachy, and they struggle to convey its scale. It was not a series of battles, but a continuous eruption, a decade-long convulsion during which the world forgot the shape of peace. Mountains became weapons, hurled through the air and shattering on impact, their fragments raining down to scar the earth for ages after. Rivers boiled where Zeus's lightning struck. Forests ignited and burned for months, their smoke rising to obscure the sky. The ground split, and from the chasms came heat and steam, the world's deep breath made visible. The Titans fought with the strength of the old order, the accumulated weight of an age that had known stability, however brittle. Hyperion blazed, his light searing, driving back those who came too close. Iapetus moved like a mountain himself, slow but inexorable, his blows reshaping the landscape. Creus wielded the sky's cold edges, frost and cutting wind. Atlas bore the burden of his father's command, fighting not from conviction but from duty, and in his eyes was a weariness that would one day be made literal. The Olympians answered with the raw force of youth and necessity. Zeus's thunderbolt split the air again and again, each crack a declaration, each flash illuminating the battlefield in stark white and shadow. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and the earth shook, and fissures opened beneath the Titans' feet, swallowing some, throwing others off balance. Hades moved unseen through the chaos, appearing at critical moments to turn a tide, to fell a foe, to vanish again before the counterattack could land. But it was the 100-handers who tipped the balance. Cottus, Briareus, Gyges. 3 brothers who had spent an eternity learning patience in the dark, who had endured when endurance seemed the only option, who'd been freed not once but twice, and who understood with perfect clarity what it meant to be returned to chains. They fought with a fury that was not rage but focus, a channeling of all their suppressed strength into a single purpose. They stood at the plain's edge, and they reached down, and with their 100 hands each they lifted boulders, not 1 or 2, but dozens at a time, whole sections of hillside, and they hurled them. The air filled with stone. The sky darkened under the weight of the barrage. The Titans, strong as they were, could not stand against that onslaught. Mountains struck mountains, the earth groaned under the impact, and slowly, inevitably, the elder gods began to fall back. Kronos fought longest. He stood at the centre of the Titan line, refusing to yield, his face set in the grim determination of one who knows he is losing but cannot allow himself to stop. He had ruled an age. He had shaped the world in the image of his will. To surrender now was to admit that all of it, the wounding of his father, the swallowing of his children, the long years of vigilance and fear, had been for nothing. Zeus met him in the heart of the storm. Lightning and thunder filled the space between them, and for a moment the war seemed to pause, to draw breath and watch as father and son faced one another across the wreckage of the world they had both claimed. "Yield," Zeus said, and his voice was not cruel but firm, the voice of one who has already won and is offering mercy not from weakness but from certainty. "I cannot," Kronos said, and there was almost regret in his tone, a sadness that ran deeper than defeat. "If I yield, I am nothing. The prophecy consumes me. I become only the father who fell, the cautionary shape in the songs. I cannot." "Then fall," Zeus said, and the thunderbolt blazed, and Kronos, for all his strength, for all his cunning, could not stand against it. He went down, not killed, gods do not die so easily, but broken, his power spent, his reign ended. Around him, his brothers faltered. Hyperion's light dimmed. Iapetus lowered his arms. Crius turned away, acknowledging the inevitable. One by one, the Titans ceased their resistance, and the war that had shaken the cosmos for 10 years drew toward its close. The victors gathered the defeated. It was Hades, moving unseen, who bound them, Poseidon who opened the way, and Zeus who pronounced the sentence. There was no malice in it, no cruelty for its own sake, but there was finality. "You will go to Tartarus," Zeus said, his voice carrying across the plain, across the ruined landscape, reaching even those who had fled or hidden. Not as prisoners alone, but as reminders. The world has turned. The old order is past. You will dwell in the deep places, and the gates will close behind you, and they will not open again. The Titans were led, some walking, some dragged, to the chasm that yawned at the world's edge, the place where Tartarus met the roots of the earth. Kronos went first, his head bowed, his shoulders bent under the weight of failure. Iapetus followed, silent. Crius and Coeus, Hyperion dimmed to mere shadow. Atlas, before he descended, was called back. "You," Zeus said, looking at the Titan who had fought not from ambition but from loyalty, who had borne his father's commands without question. "You will not go below. Your sentence is different." Atlas met his eyes, wary. "What would you have of me?" "The sky," Zeus said. "It must be held apart from the earth, lest the world collapse back into its beginning. You will bear it. You will stand at the western edge and hold the vault upon your shoulders, and you will not rest, and you will not falter, and through you the separation will endure." It was a sentence harsher in some ways than imprisonment, an eternal labour, visible, unending, a burden that could never be set down. Atlas looked at the sky, gauging its weight, and then he nodded. "I will bear it." And so he took his place, and the sky settled on his shoulders, and the world learned that punishment can take many forms, and that some of them are gentler than others only in appearing so. The gates of Tartarus closed, bronze and adamant, thick beyond measure, they sealed the defeated gods in the deep. And as wardens, Zeus appointed the 100-handers, who took their posts with the solemnity of those who understand the importance of what they guard. They would not sleep. They would not waver. The prison was secure, and the cosmos could breathe without fearing the old power's return. But even as the gates closed, even as the war's last echoes faded, a new threat stirred. Gaia, who had counselled Rhea, who had opened the way for Zeus's victory, who had longed for the freedom of her buried children, looked at the new order and saw in it not liberation but another form of binding. The Titans were imprisoned, her sons locked away once more, and the rule of heaven had simply changed hands without changing nature. Her grief, which had softened briefly in the hope that the younger gods might govern differently, hardened again into something colder and more dangerous. From her deepest places, from the molten core where her anger had gathered and condensed, she brought forth one final child with Tartarus. Typhon, the songs call him, and his name is less a word than a sound, a howl, a roar, a wind that strips the leaves from trees and scours the earth to stone. He rose from the chasm, vast and terrible. His head brushed the stars. His arms, when he stretched them, spanned horizons. 100 serpent heads sprouted from his shoulders, each one hissing, each one speaking in a different voice, some like thunder, some like the crackle of fire, some like the screams of animals in pain. His eyes burned. His breath was ash and sulphur. He was chaos given shape, the world's rage made animate, and he turned his faces toward Olympus and began to climb. The gods, weary from 10 years of war, looked at him and despaired. Even Zeus, holding the thunderbolt, felt the weight of doubt. This was not an enemy that could be reasoned with, negotiated, or even clearly fought. This was the earth's answer to heaven's presumption, and it seemed for a moment unanswerable. But Zeus did not flee. He stood at Olympus's peak, and he raised the thunderbolt, and he spoke not to Typhon but to his siblings, to the Cyclopes, to the sky itself. "One more," he said, "one more fight and then we rest. One more and the world is ours to shape as we will." Poseidon struck the earth, and the ground beneath Typhon buckled. Hades moved unseen, distracting, pulling the monster's attention in a dozen directions. Hera stood firm, her presence a rallying point, a refusal to yield. And Zeus, gathering all the storm's force, all the lightning the Cyclops had folded into the bolt, all the authority he had claimed and fought for and earned, struck. The thunderbolt blazed. Not once, but again and again, a barrage of light and sound that rivaled the 100-hander's stone storm, that split the air and shook the mountain and drove through Typhon's serpent heads, through his burning eyes, through the core of his monstrous form. He roared, and the roar was a gale, but the thunder answered, and the thunder was louder. For a span that might have been hours or days, time loses its measure in such extremities. They fought. Typhon writhed and struck and tried to drag the mountain down. Zeus answered every blow with lightning, every advance with storm, until at last, exhausted, spent, the monster faltered. Zeus did not kill him. Perhaps he could not. Typhon was Gaia's child, and the earth does not die. Instead, he drove him down, back into the depths, and sealed him beneath a mountain. Etna, some songs say, or another peak in that volcanic chain, where the monster's breath still rises as steam, where his rage still rumbles as earthquake, where the world remembers that chaos is never fully tamed, only contained. When it was done, when Typhon was bound and the last threat crushed, Zeus stood on Olympus and looked out over the world that was now his to govern. His siblings joined him: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, the 6 who had been swallowed and freed, who'd fought together and won together, who now had to determine what shape their victory would take. "We need order," Themis said, stepping forward from the place where she had watched the wars unfolding. "Division of realms, so that each of you has dominion and none must contest the others for primacy." Zeus nodded slowly. "Then let us divide by lot, as is fitting, and abide by what the lots decree." 3 tokens were prepared, one marked with sky and lightning, one with waves and trident, one with shadow and the unseen. They were placed in a vessel, and each of the 3 brothers drew without looking. Zeus drew the sky. The heavens would be his realm, the storms his to command, the high bright air his throne. Poseidon drew the sea, the waters, the tides, the depths and the shores. All of it would answer to him. and he would shake the earth when his temper required it. Hades drew the unseen realm, the underworld, the place where the dead would gather, where shadows walked and memory lingered, would be his kingdom, and he would rule it with quiet authority far from the light. And the earth? Demeter asked. The earth is common, Themis said. No one god claims it wholly. It is the ground you share, the place where all realms meet. Guard it together, and let no one hold it as possession. The sisters nodded. Hera would stand beside Zeus as queen, her dignity the counterweight to his authority. Demeter would tend the fields and the seasons, the grain and the harvest. Hestia would keep the hearth, the still centre, the fire that never goes out. Each had her place, each her domain, and together they made the fabric of the new order. The Cyclopes were honoured for their craft, given their forges and their freedom, asked to continue shaping the tools the gods would need. The 100-handers took their posts at Tartarus's gates, and their service was acknowledged as valour, as loyalty, as the fulfilment of a promise Zeus had made and kept. Prometheus, who had fought on the Olympian side despite his Titan blood, was granted a place of honour, though the seeds of future conflict were already visible in the way Zeus watched him, in the way the cunning Titan smiled when he thought no one was looking. But that is a story for another age, another telling. Aphrodite, older than the thrones themselves and untouched by the iron of the war, was welcome to Olympus, and her presence gentled the bright, fierce energy of the new court, reminded them that not all power is loud, not all strength obvious. Gaia, her last effort spent, her final child bound, withdrew into herself. She did not reconcile with Zeus, did not bless the new order, but neither did she oppose it further. She was tired. She had borne the world and the gods, had suffered the weight of her children's imprisonment twice over, had given counsel and craft and at the last rage. Now she rested, and the earth, common ground, remained her body, unowned but ever present. The cosmos exhaled. The war was over. The old powers were bound or withdrawn. The new gods stood in the light they had claimed, and the world, scarred but whole, began to learn the shapes of this new age. Zeus stood at the peak of Olympus, the thunderbolt in his hand, and he looked out over the realms he'd won. The sky stretched above, clear now, no longer pressed close by the weight of a fearful father. The earth rolled below, open and green, recovering from the war's passage. The sea glittered at the horizon's edge, and somewhere beneath the ground the gates of Tartarus stood firm, guarded and sealed. "It is done," he said quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone, to his siblings, to the air, to the cosmos itself. Hera, standing beside him, placed a hand on his arm. "It is begun," she corrected gently. "What comes next is ours to shape." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. Victory is not an ending, but a threshold. The world would continue to turn. New challenges would rise. New stories would unfold. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. Hard-won, fragile, precious. Hestia tended the hearth at the mountain's centre, and the flame burned steady, and its light reached every corner of Olympus, warm and constant. Demeter walked the earth below, blessing the soil that had been scorched, coaxing new growth from ashen ruin. Poseidon dove into the sea, claiming his realm with a joy that was almost childlike, sending waves to shore in playful salute. Hades descended to the underworld, accepting his domain with the quiet dignity that would define his rule, knowing that what he governed was no less important for being hidden. The Cyclops hammered in their forges, shaping beauty now as well as weapons, learning that peace requires its own tools. The 100-handers stood watch, their 100 arms at rest but ready, their 50 heads scanning the horizon for threats that did not come. And across the world, in the places where mortals would one day walk, where cities would rise and fields be sown, the earth remembered. It remembered the chasm from which everything had emerged, the slow patient shaping of Gaia's will, the violence that had separated sky from ground, the war that had reshaped heaven, the peace that followed. Memory, Mnemosyne's gift, wove it all into the fabric of the world, so that even when the gods themselves forgot, the earth would remember. The stars turned in their courses. The moon, which would soon be named, began its slow climb into the sky, its light borrowed from the sun that would learn its own path. The constellations, which the poets would later name and story, took their places, fixed points in the turning vault, reminders that even chaos once ordered holds a kind of beauty. Zeus set the thunderbolt aside. Not discarded, it would always be ready, always close, but no longer needed in hand. The age of fighting had passed, the age of ruling had begun, and ruling, he was learning, required not just strength but wisdom, not just power but patience, not just victory but the will to build something that would last. He thought of his father, imprisoned below. He thought of his grandfather, withdrawn into the distant heights. He thought of the curse that had followed them both. The son shall overthrow the father, and he wondered if it could be broken, or if he too would one day face a child's rebellion, a child's necessary claim. But that was a question for the future. For now, the world was young again, newborn from the war's ashes, and the gods who had won the right to shape it stood together, united by blood and struggle, and the shared knowledge of what it cost to reach this height. Hera began to sing softly, a melody without words, and one by one the others joined her. It was not a song of triumph, not a hymn to war or victory. It was something gentler, a lullaby, a blessing, a promise that the night would pass and the morning come, and that the hearth would burn through all the darkness, steady and warm and bright. The world listened. The mountains leaned close. The rivers slowed to hear. And in that moment, the cosmos, which had begun in a yawning gap, which had learned separation and strife, which had borne the weight of fathers' fears and children's wrath, learned also how to rest. The tale, as all tales must, finds its end here. Not because the story is finished, stories are never truly finished, but because this chapter has closed, this age has found its shape, and what comes next belongs to other tellings, other voices, other nights when the dark presses close, and the old words are needed to remind us how the world began, and how it held, and how it continues still. The chasm yawned. The earth rose, the sky withdrew, thunder spoke, and the new gods answered, and the cosmos, balanced on the edge between chaos and order, chose the side of light, and the hearth burns still, tended by hands that will not tire, its flame a promise that no night lasts forever, that every ending is a beginning in disguise, and that the world, for all its sorrows, is a place where even the broken can be made whole. Sleep now and dream of mountains, dream of thunder and starlight, of waves that roll forever, of the quiet places beneath the earth where memory keeps its vigil. Dream of the gods in their bright halls, of the titans in their deep prison, of Atlas holding the sky so that the world can breathe. And when you wake, the hearth will still be burning, and the story, though told, will be waiting to be told again, as it always has, as it always will, as long as there are voices to speak it and ears to hear. The world has begun, and that, for now, is enough.